and thanks for joining us for another edition of Mid-American Gardener. I'm your host, Tinisha Spain, and we're going to do a bit of a special show today. We're going to check in with a Champaign gardener who invites us to her home and shows us native plants, talks about how to divide plants, and also shows us how she's raising some butterflies. That's later. But first, we're going to check in with one of our veteran panelists, Ella Maxwell, and she's going to talk to us all about the thing that is troubling all of us right now at home, the weeds in the garden and in the flower bed. So Ella, before we get into that, introduce yourself to everyone and tell them about your interests outside in the garden.
Okay, thanks. I'm Ella Maxwell. I'm in Tazewell County, and I'm a Tazewell County Master Gardener as well as a horticulturist at a local nursery. And I am a big home gardener. So I like perennials. I have a large vegetable garden, and I have a very large yard with lots of trees, a lot of shaded areas, as well as sun. So we have weeds out the wazoo.
And you were outside kind of working on those today. So however you want to start, we're going to talk about identifying weeds, controlling them. So you tell us where you want to start today, and we are going to be your attentive student because the weeds are taking over everything.
That's right. They certainly are. And weed control, I think, is a very important part of gardening because it doesn't reflect badly on you, but you can certainly drive by and notice some yards are not as tidy as other yards. And of course, being a professional, you want to put your best foot forward. And so what we're going to talk about are some of the different challenges that I have in my own garden. And the first thing that you want to understand about weeds is to be able to identify it. Is it, first off, a grass weed? They require a different type of control, or is it a broadleaf weed like a dandelion? Many of us are very familiar with lawn weeds, dandelion, plantain, clover, and the horrible creeping Charlie, but some of us may not be as familiar with some of the weeds that will show up in our flower beds or in our vegetable garden, especially with making your own compost. Sometimes you can disturb that weed or that seed bed and have a lot of weed seeds germinate. So we will talk about how to control them too. But I wanted to share a book that I have that has been quite helpful. This is The Weeds of the North Central States. And I received this book in 1979. That one was when it was reprinted from a 1960 update. And it has weeds arranged by the plant families. So you'll see weeds that have the same flowering parts and different things like that. But it's important to identify weeds. Unfortunately, this book is not showing some of the new weeds that have become problematic in our landscape because over time, new weeds have been introduced into our areas, just like introduced insects or jumping worms or, whatever it is. So we're going to see some other problems that maybe I didn't have when I first started out gardening, but now we're seeing them.
So tell me why, as a home gardener, as just a lay person, why do I need to know the specifics about types of weeds? What's in it for me as the gardener?
Well, as the gardener, the best way to control your weeds is to understand how they reseed or how they propagate so that you can choose the best way to control them. Hand weeding is hard work. And so if you can avoid as much of that as possible, that's going to be what's going to work for me. So in that vein, we also want to know, is this a perennial weed? Is this same plant there in that same location year after year? And there are some perennial weeds, but most of the time we can eliminate them in the garden and we don't see them again. The one that's problematic for a lot of people are some of the perennial grasses. And you can see here, this is quack grass, and it kind of, normally it's a lot shorter if it's in your lawn because you're mowing it, but this was in the flower bed, but you can see this long rhizome. And so it's very difficult to eradicate. And, I have been fighting it for a real long time. But then there are some of these annual weeds, and one that I find the most infuriating is here. It's a huge clump, but this is dayflower, and I don't know if you can see. It's kind of like a little wandering Jew, and it can grow overnight, I think, and it reseeds. And it's a problem I have in lots of parts of my landscape. So that's one. It's a camelina, I think. Again, these weeds have lots of regional common names, but you can then specifically identify them by their botanical names. So I just wrote a little cheat sheet on these. So these are the ones that a few more that I can share. Some things can actually even be vines. A lot of people have problems with the bind weeds. I have more of a problem with hops. Again, it kind of has a very sandpapery like stem. It's a clinging, twining vine. And so that's some things to control. So how can we control some of these things? Besides,
I was just going to ask you or mention how frustrating it is when you're out there working and you're pulling and you hear it snap, but you know that there's still some more root down there that you didn't get, and it's coming back.
Right.
That's really frustrating.
That's the perennial weed. And this one happens to be kind of like a carrot. This is a very wilted pokeweed, but in natural areas, you're going to find that it's a problem. So I don't have it really where I'm more aggressively flower gardening, but in a more natural area, I have that. And if you try to pull it up and like you say, it snaps off, and it'll be back.
It'll be right back.
Yes. So there's a couple of things that you can do in like an annual bed where each year you are planting flowers, or in your vegetable garden, you might find that you want to use what's called a pre-emergent herbicide. So this can be sprinkled on the ground after you've planted your annuals to prevent other seeds from germinating. And so I have used those kinds of products along the edge of my beds. In my vegetable garden, I rely on mulching to smother the weeds to keep them from coming up. I use newspaper and straw between my plantings, and that's been very effective. But you can use the pre-emergent type herbicide, and then there is also some of the post-emergent types where they're again broken down into two categories. One that will target the broadleaf or the grass-like weed, but they could also damage your flowers because they are,
indiscriminate. I mean, they work.
Right. And then there's the non-selective that just kills anything green. And again, you have to be so careful with overspray and things like that. And sometimes because of that, I've actually taken plastic pots and set them over desirable plants and sprayed around them so that I don't get that kind of overspray.
So in these days where we've had all of this rain and we've had, a lapse of getting out and weeding. I've heard a lot of people say that. What is the best way once it's away from you to sort of catch back up? Is it getting out there and manually pulling, or what tips do you have for folks who have just, it's out of control?
Well, I think in my beds, I'm trying to stay on top of it a little bit more. But one thing that I've also found that works well is weed whacking. It kind of cuts them down, and then maybe I can do some spot spraying. Also, sometimes the most important thing to do with the weeds is not allow them to complete their life cycle like an annual and set seed. So if you can weed whack off the flowers, maybe that's enough to maybe reduce the problem for the following year. And sometimes in natural areas, that's what I do with something like garlic mustard, because I can't pull it all. I don't want to try to spray it, but I can go in there and weed whack. And there are lots of strategies. These weeds want to live. And a lot of them have little sticky green seed coats that stick to everything. You walk through, you pick those up. I just hate them. We have one at my house that I just call icky weed. It's really a pillatory, I think is its common name. I did investigate what it really was, but it's just insidious. And now I can recognize it as a seedling, and I can pull it even before it flowers and becomes such a stick to you magnet.
Are you talking like the burr sort of prickly?
Yes. And, I think I have that. So most of the weeds that we have problems with are annual weeds, and they have little sticky seeds, and if you don't control them, they just will be back. And so again, I do like mulch. I use a pre-emergent herbicide along the edges. I weed whack. I do spray some non-selective chemicals on occasion, and those are my strategies.
Is there anything, you mentioned this at the very beginning, I think you were heading in that direction about disturbing weeds that have already flowered or are going to have flowers? Is there anything there about just containing perhaps and interrupting that life cycle?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying with weed whacking. Hopefully that cuts them down. But I do a lot of hand pulling. Early in the spring, a lot of these weeds, before they've set seed, I feel comfortable composting them. But once they are full of the little burrs or the little ticks or the little whatever they are, I no longer put them in my compost. They're going to go and dry out and become part of the materials that in my location we're allowed to burn.
Gotcha. And I'm curious about the book that you got back in, did you say 79?
79. It was a college, book that was required reading or purchasing.
Interesting.
And
are there photos in there?
What now?
Is it a picture book? Are there pictures of the weeds in there?
So I marked a few here. Well, you can't really see, but this is like prickly lettuce. So it gives its distribution throughout the state. It gives its life cycle. It gives where it can be found. It gives, it shows a picture of what the seed looks like and things. But like I said, not all of them anymore are there. This is a new kind of weed, and I think we can kind of see it has a little globular seeds. And this is called mulberry weed. That's its common name because the little fruit kind of looks like a mulberry. And it was one that I have not seen before. And just in the last couple of years, it's become more of a problem.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Ella. That is a common theme that I've been seeing in our emails and just in talking to people is, oh my gosh, the weeds are out of control. So identifying what weeds you've got and then learning how to control and treat sounds like the plan of attack. So thank you so
Right.
much for coming on and talking to us about weeds. And hopefully we can all play catch up now from that rainy July that we had.
Sure.
All right. And now, as promised, we're going to check in with Judy Seib in Champaign as she walks us around her yard in this edition of Other People's Garden.
On this edition of Other People's Gardens, we are joined with Judy Seib of the University of Illinois, and she is going to walk us through her beautiful yard and garden. And also, if you've got some perennials that are thriving and ready to divide, Judy's going to show us how to do that. So we're going to start out with some Spiderwort, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Tell us a little bit about the plant and then where you're going to be moving it to.
Okay. Well, Spiderwort's one of my favorite plants. It's a native perennial plant that's the butterflies and bees and hummingbirds like it. And this is it right here. And it's got pretty little flowers, and it'll bloom for about 2 months, which is a good amount of time for a perennial.
Now this is the one that you were telling me that opens in the morning?
Right. It's only open for the mornings. It's getting ready. A lot of them have closed up already. It doesn't like the hot sun afternoon. So usually by 11 o'clock in the morning, if it's sunny, they'll be closed. If it's cloudy all day, they'll stay open. So it's a really pretty plant. And I had a couple of them come up as volunteers right here. And they're even blooming. And I thought I'd dig one of those up. And it's all closed up now. Okay, but I thought I'd dig one of those up and we could see the root structure. Can also dig from the big clumps.
Now how long has this mature patch, how long have you had these?
I've had these for probably 3, maybe 4 years.
Oh wow.
No more than 4 years.
So that's really grown.
So yeah, it has filled in. But that's just more plants to give away and scatter.
Right.
So
are these fairly easy to maintain?
These are very easy to maintain. There's really nothing to do to them. If we don't get enough rain by mid-year, I might end up watering them. This is fresh dill. So, and this is a little milkweed plant.
A bonus.
So there's all kinds of things, but I'll show you. Let's get down to get rid of some of this because we don't need it.
Now what is it about this plant that you like?
I like that it's a perennial because I like things that come back every year, things that flower nicely. I get up in the morning and I come out and the first thing I look at are these flowers, and when they're open in the early morning they are so beautiful. So this has a nice root structure, and we'll take this to the backyard. I've got a spot where I want to put it.
Okay, so you've got your hole dug, and I found it interesting that you said you water the hole before you plant.
Yes.
So talk a little bit
absolutely.
about that.
Even though we did have some rain, I always water the hole because that way the water's all the way down to the roots and the plant can get settled in really well. So I can put the dirt all around it. So I'm putting this in from the front yard to the backyard. I don't have a whole lot of open spots anymore.
Which is always a good thing.
Yeah. But I love giving away plants, and people like to get this plant.
I think I'm going to start watering the hole. Like most people, I always dig the hole, put the plant in, and then water it all in, but I really like this method.
You want to do it this way.
I like this.
Matter of fact, I'm going to add some more water right now because I want that dirt to settle all around the roots. And I'll give it some more water. And it's off to a good start now because I know it's wet all the way down, foot down to the roots. So even if I transplant a little plant, I dig that hole and I put a whole cup of water in it. If the water goes down quickly, you need to keep filling the hole. But like I say, the ground's a little bit wet from the rain that we had. But always water the hole.
Okay. Now this is another unique technique that you do that I'm really interested in. So you collect leaves from a couple folks in the neighborhood and just walk us through what you do with this pile.
Well, I do. If people have raked their leaves up into a big pile, I say, oh, can I take those leaves? And they say, yeah, sure.
Please.
Take them. And there's a lot of them are my own leaves, also from my trees. But then in the fall, I just pile them up in a big pile, always here in the back. They're going to degrade during the winter. And then in the spring, when my garden plants they've got to be a little bit taller, then it's time that I can tuck them in with this mulch, and I'm a lazy gardener. So
You're in good
the
company.
the less I have to water and the less I have to weed, the better. Plus it adds nutrients to the soil.
And you also have a chemical-free yard, is that
I
right?
do. I have not put any chemicals on my yard for 25 years. So I think that's why my perennial plants do so well. I think they appreciate that.
And the earthworms are another good indication that they really like your soil, and they...
That's right. I think a lot of the chemicals that are put on the yards kill the earthworms. And you can't have good soil without earthworms.
That's right.
So this is the garden that the rabbits don't bother. I don't have to fence it in. So I have squash, butternut squash, and then the tomato plants. And this is easy to do, and it makes a big difference.
Now, throughout the summer, this will break down.
Yes.
Do you
fall,
rake it in, or do you just leave it right on top?
I just leave it on top.
Okay.
The best time to do it is after a really big rain. The ground is already wet. The plants love it. Keeps the soil cool and moist, the weeds out, and makes my life easier. And by fall, there won't be a whole lot left, and by time winter happens, all these leaves will just be gone. They'll just be into the soil. A lot of these plants I took from the front yard and brought them back here, so it's free plants. And this is the common milkweed, which the insects love, especially once it's going to flower, and the monarch butterfly caterpillars have to have that to survive. So I've had quite a bit of it coming up, but it'll be used for food for the caterpillars. And this is penstemon, and it makes a very pretty flower by a little bit more into the summer. And once again, they were coming up in the front yard, and I brought them back here to fill in, and I do give a lot of them away. So that's the idea. And this is the blazing prairie star plant, and this will get very tall. This will get 7 feet tall and has a beautiful spike of purple flowers on the top of it. And it's kind of known as Jewel of the Prairie.
Ooh.
So it's a
What about
wonderful
these?
plant.
This is these look like the same, but this foliage is different.
It is. This is a different type of penstemon, and it, once again, I bought one plant last year, and then this spring about 4 or 5 came up, and I divided them and gave them away.
I bet a lot of
So,
people are
brought
going
one
through
back
that
here.
this year. That put in flowers last year, and now they've got big patches like this that have come up. So everyone's looking to divide and share and relocate some of their flowers. And you also grow vegetables too, right?
Yes, and I have a vegetable garden, and this is the garden that the rabbits like.
So that's why it's fenced off.
That's why it's fenced off, but the other part of the garden that I already showed was the squash, butternut squash. And this is a butternut squash from last fall. It's kept all winter long in my house in a box in kind of a dark corner, and it's still delicious. I've been eating them all winter, and and they're very easy to grow, and it's solid flesh throughout the whole thing is
hard to cut. You have to have a good knife for these guys.
Yeah. Well, I use a potato peeler.
Oh.
I peel them, and then I scoop out the seeds in the middle, and then I dice them up and make butternut squash soup.
Nice.
So that's how I do it. You have to cut the ends off with a sharp knife, but then a potato peeler to get rid of the it's almost like peeling a potato. And in the garden, these are carrots coming up, and I do like carrots, but they are mostly for the benefit of the black swallowtail caterpillars, because that's one of their favorite food sources. So every year I find many eggs on here, and I take them and put them in my little cage, and I raise the black swallowtail butterflies, and it's a lot of fun. And some of them hatch last year, but a lot of them overwinter. So
you still have some, right?
I still have chrysalises waiting to hatch, and I'll show you those also.
These look a lot different than the monarch chrysalis that I'm used to. They really blend in.
Yes, they're well protected. They look, I don't know if you get close up, and then you can see there's 3 of them on here. So I've got one there, and this one has hatched. So it's empty. It's all done. These guys, some of them hatched last fall, last summer. Some overwintered, and they'll take their time hatching. They might not hatch until midsummer.
Wow.
So
they really aren't on a schedule, are they?
No, they're not. They're not. But the black swallowtail is a beautiful butterfly, and they'll do it on there, or they'll hang themselves up.
Oh.
So I've got several. Yeah, and this is more like what monarchs do. But they'll hang themselves up, and each one is also suspended by a very thin one strand of silk. Right there, if you can see it. And that's how they stay suspended, just one strand, and then they kind of have a silk button to hold them down also.
Well, if we learned nothing else today, we learned how to incorporate our flowers and our food and everything into, I love how you just weave everything into nature, and everything is included. You've got the thoughts about the butterflies, even down to your grass. It's very thoughtful. So thank you for sharing this with us. Thank you for letting us come to your home.
It was my pleasure.
And a big thank you to Judy and Ella for their participation in today's show. And if you've got a yard or a garden you think we should see, send us an email to yourgarden@gmail.com, or you can send us a message on Facebook. And as always, join us every Thursday at 7 for Mid-American Gardener on WILL TV. Good night.